You're in the middle of something normal, talking, working, doing a task, and without anything dramatic happening, something in your attention quietly shifts. Not to the task, but to yourself. Your attention stops being fully locked onto what you're doing. Instead, it turns inward. You start noticing yourself in the situation. How do I sound? How am I performing? Am I doing it right? And the strange part is that the task itself hasn't changed. What changes is where your attention is being allocated. And once you see what's actually happening in that shift, the way your attention, evaluation, and emotion interact won't feel like a black box anymore. Part of your attention is still executing the task, but another part is now monitoring you while you do it. And in real time, this often feels like a subtle loss of flow, like something slightly breaks in how automatic things feel. Now that shift matters because in cognitive science, your cognition is organized around goal-directed processes. You carry internal plans for how you're supposed to behave, perform, or achieve things. And there's a control layer in your cognition. It's often referred to as self-regulatory executive function, and it constantly tracks those plans in the background. It holds the goal in working memory and evaluates if your current actions are moving you toward the goal or away from it. Now, when things are going smoothly, that control layer stays quiet. Attention stays on the task, your action feels automatic, and you don't notice anything at all. But when a mismatch between your actions and the goal is detected, when things aren't going as expected, that control layer becomes more active. It starts checking your performance against that goal. And at that point, you can often feel a subtle shift. The task stops feeling fully automatic and becomes slightly self-conscious. Now, that evaluation process is where emotion comes from. In cognitive science, this kind of evaluation is called an appraisal. If your mind registers that you might be failing relative to an important goal, it produces anxiety. If your mind registers that something important is not going right or has already gone wrong, then that produces a bad mood or discouragement. So the emotion is the output of how your mind evaluates the status of your goals in real time. Now, most of the time, the ongoing evaluation stays in the background. You can make small mistakes, lose a game, or have a slightly awkward moment, and nothing major happens internally. Your mind updates that evaluation and moves on. You might not even remember it a minute later. The shift happens when the situation becomes self-relevant. And this is something you can actually notice happening. Sometimes it starts with a single thought, like noticing you sounded awkward or made a mistake. If that thought is treated as unimportant, it passes. But if your evaluation processes treat it as meaningful, if it becomes like, this says something about me, then attention shifts more strongly inward. And at that point, the experience changes in a very specific way. You're no longer just doing the task, you're watching yourself do the task. And this is what's called self-referential processing. It's attention directed toward yourself rather than to the task. And that's usually when your performance begins to feel less automatic. Other times the situation is set up that way. You're not just performing, you're being judged, observed, or evaluated by yourself. And in those cases, your attention and working memory are handling two things at once: the task itself and a running evaluation of how you are performing it. And here's a key constraint. Attention and working memory operate under strict capacity limits. So the same mental resources that support your performance are now split. Part is used for execution and part is used for self-monitoring. And you can often feel the effect of that split immediately. You start thinking about actions that normally happen without thinking. You hesitate, you lose fluency. And even simple actions begin to feel slightly less automatic. And then something important happens. Your evaluation processes detect that change in performance and interpret it. The reduced fluency gets read as possible failure. That increases your cognitive evaluation even more. So your attention shifts more inward towards self-monitoring, and this cycle begins to form. Self-monitoring takes resources away from performance. Reduced resources makes performance worse. Worse performance is interpreted as failure, and that interpretation pulls even more attention inward. You see that? This loop is driven by how attention and working memory are allocated every moment. And it's essentially a self-regulatory loop where your attention, evaluation, and action are constantly influencing each other. So there's a useful signal to notice here. It's specific. You're still doing the task, but the part of your attention is now monitoring how you are doing it instead of simply doing it. Emotion strengthens this loop even more. When your anxiety or bad mood is active, your memory retrieval becomes biased towards negative interpretations, past failures, and threat-related meanings. So your evaluation is no longer neutral. It's biased towards confirming that something is wrong. And that makes this loop harder to exit because new information is more likely to be interpreted negatively. And at this point, your cognition becomes recursive. You're not just thinking about what you're doing. You're also reacting to your own thoughts about what you're doing. And this is where metacognition comes in. It's higher level self-regulation, or thinking about thinking, metacognition. Your attention starts monitoring its own internal activity, and that monitoring becomes part of the same loop. So your attention is no longer just on the task, or even just on the self. It's now focused on evaluating the self. And that is what keeps worry and rumination going. So this kind of sustained loop is called perseveration. Now below that, another layer is running in parallel. Your brain stores past experiences as structured expectations. So if you've repeatedly struggled in a certain kind of situation, your brain retrieves that expectation from stored patterns. It activates automatically, often through lower level processing. And that means the prediction of likely failure can show up before you've consciously thought anything. This is why emotional reactions can feel fast, even automatic. The evaluation is already partly built into the activated pattern. Now, one of the most common ways people try to break this is distraction. And in the short term, distraction works. If you shift your attention elsewhere, fewer resources are available for self-monitoring. This loop weakens and your emotion drops. And you can usually feel that relief fairly quickly. But the underlying goal is still active. Nothing about that discrepancy has been resolved. So when the distraction ends, your attention returns to the same unresolved evaluation. And the loop starts again. That's why distraction gives relief, but not lasting change. In some cases, distraction prevents learning. Because if your attention is somewhere else at the point where your expectations could be updated, you don't fully register that the outcome was less threatening than predicted. So the same expectation stays in place. Now, intrusive thoughts follow a similar pattern. They occur naturally in ongoing mental activity. Everyone has them. What makes them persistent is not their presence, but how they're treated. If a thought appears and is treated as irrelevant, it fades. But if it's treated as meaningful, especially as something that reflects on you, it becomes something your attention keeps returning to. And the more you monitor it, the more likely you are to notice it again. So attention increases detection. Detection increases importance, and importance increases attention. So, and attempts to suppress the thought often keep it active because suppression still requires monitoring it. So your attention stays locked onto the very thing you're trying to remove. Now, across all of this, the key turning point is always the same: where your attention is being allocated. When your attention is outward, focused on the task, your cognition is efficient and automatic. When your attention turns inward into self-monitoring, your working memory gets divided, your performance is less stable, and your emotional evaluation intensifies. The task could feel less automatic. You start checking yourself and you begin evaluating instead of simply acting. Now that's the moment the mode changes. Not from thinking to feeling, but from execution to self-evaluation. By the way, if you're finding this series useful so far, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. And what actually helps is not forcing thoughts away or trying to eliminate emotion. It's being able to redirect your attention back outward into the task itself and keep it there. Specifically back into what you are seeing, hearing, or physically doing in real time. Because when your attention is stable on the external world, your working memory is freed again for performance. Your self-monitoring decreases. Your evaluation calms down and the loop weakens. An experience becomes less about watching yourself happen and more about simply doing what you're doing. So if this helped you understand what's been happening in your own experience, please support the channel again by subscribing, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.